Australian literature in English is a rich and diverse field that reflects the country's unique history, landscape, and multicultural society. It encompasses a wide range of genres, including fiction, poetry, drama, and nonfiction, and addresses themes such as identity, colonialism, migration, and the relationship between people and the land. Key themes in Australian literature: colonialism and Indigenous voices. Early Australian literature often dealt with the experiences of British settlers and convicts. Over time, Indigenous Australian voices have become more prominent, addressing the impact of colonization and reclaiming their narratives. Notable works include Carpentaria, by Alexis Wrighton, Follow the Rabbit-Proof Fence, by Doris Pilkington Garamara. The Australian landscape. The vast, often harsh Australian landscape is a significant element in the country's literature, shaping characters and narratives. This can be seen in works like Patrick White's Voss, and Tim Winton's Cloud Street, where the land itself becomes a character. Identity and multiculturalism. As a nation of immigrants, Australian literature often explores themes of identity, belonging, and the multicultural experience. This is evident in works like Christos Tsiolkas' The Slap, and Peter Carey's True History of the Kelly Gang. The urban versus the rural. The tension between urban and rural life is another recurring theme. Novels like Ruth Park's The Harp in the South explore the struggles of working-class families in urban environments, while others focus on the isolation and challenges of rural life. Prominent authors in Australian literature. Patrick White. The first Australian to win the Nobel Prize in Literature 1973, White's works, such as The Tree of Man and The Vivisector, explore complex psychological and existential themes. Miles Franklin. Best known for her novel, My Brilliant Career, Franklin's work often examines the role of women in Australian society. The Miles Franklin Award, one of Australia's most prestigious literary prizes, is named in her honor. Tim Winton. A contemporary author whose works, including Breath and Dirt Music, often explore the relationship between people and the natural environment, as well as themes of masculinity and redemption. Peter Carey. Two-time Booker Prize winner, Carey is known for his inventive storytelling in works like Oscar and Lucinda and Illuaker, which blend historical fact with fiction. David Malouf. Malouf's novels, such as Remembering Babylon and An Imaginary Life, often delve into the complexities of cultural identity and the impact of history on the present. Notable works in Australian literature. The Secret River, by Kate Grenville. This novel explores the brutal history of colonization and the clash between settlers and Indigenous Australians. The Chosen Vessel, by Barbara Bainton. A short story that highlights the harsh realities of life for women in the Australian outback, with themes of isolation and fear. Picnic at Hanging Rock, by Joan Lindsay. A classic novel that blends mystery with a haunting depiction of the Australian bush, exploring themes of the unknown and the mystical. The Narrow Road to the Deep North, by Richard Flanagan. Winner of the 2014 Booker Prize, this novel examines the experiences of Australian prisoners of war during World War II. Conclusion. Australian literature in English offers a profound exploration of the nation's history, culture, and identity. It is marked by a strong connection to the land, a grappling with the legacies of colonialism, and a rich diversity of voices that reflect the country's complex, multicultural society. Australian literature is characterized by several key arguments or themes that resonate throughout its history and body of work. Here are some of the main arguments, supported by examples from significant Australian literary works. 1. The impact of colonialism and Indigenous dispossession. Argument. Australian literature often grapples with the legacy of colonialism, the dispossession of Indigenous peoples, and the ongoing struggle for reconciliation. Example. The Secret River, by Kate Grenville explores the brutal consequences of British colonization. The novel depicts the protagonist, William Thornhill, a convict settler who claims land along the Hawkesbury River, leading to violent conflicts with the local Indigenous people. Through this narrative, Grenville illustrates the destructive impact of colonization on Indigenous Australians and raises questions about guilt, responsibility, and the potential for reconciliation. 2. The relationship between people and the Australian landscape. Argument. The Australian landscape, often depicted as both beautiful and menacing, plays a crucial role in shaping the characters and narratives in Australian literature. Example. In Tim Winton's Cloud Street, the house on Cloud Street and the Swan River are almost characters in their own right. The novel contrasts the urban environment with the spiritual connection the characters have to the land and water, reflecting broader themes of identity, belonging, and the healing power of nature. Winton's work often highlights how the harshness and beauty of the Australian landscape influence the lives of his characters. 3. The search for national identity. Argument. Australian literature frequently explores the quest for a distinct national identity, often by examining the tension between Australia's colonial past and its contemporary multicultural society. Example. Peter Carey's True History of the Kelly Gang reimagines the life of the infamous outlaw Ned Kelly, a figure who has become a symbol of Australian resistance against British authority. Through Kelly's story, Carey delves into questions of class, power, and identity, reflecting on how Australia's history shapes its national consciousness. 4. Multiculturalism and migration. Argument. As a nation built on immigration, Australian literature addresses the challenges and complexities of multiculturalism, exploring themes of displacement, assimilation, and cultural identity. Example. Christos Tsiolkas' The Slap presents a microcosm of contemporary Australian society, examining the diverse backgrounds of its characters, who are Greek, Indian, and Anglo-Australian, among others. The novel explores the tensions and prejudices that arise in a multicultural society, questioning how individuals and communities negotiate their cultural identities within the broader Australian context. 5. The role of women and feminist perspectives. Argument. Australian literature often challenges traditional gender roles and highlights the struggles of women in a patriarchal society, advocating for women's rights and equality. Example. Miles Franklin's My Brilliant Career is a pioneering feminist work that critiques the limited opportunities available to women in late 19th century Australia. The protagonist, Sibylla Melvin, rejects conventional expectations of marriage and domesticity, instead pursuing her desire for independence and a writing career. The novel reflects broader feminist concerns about women's autonomy and societal roles. 6. The tension between urban and rural life. Argument. There is a recurring tension in Australian literature between the experiences of urban and rural life, often reflecting the challenges of isolation, community, and the pull between tradition and modernity. Example. Ruth Park's The Harp in the South explores the lives of a working-class Irish-Australian family in the slums of Sydney. The novel contrasts the harsh realities of urban poverty with the idealized rural past, highlighting the difficulties of migration and the struggles of maintaining cultural identity in a rapidly changing urban environment. Conclusion. These key arguments demonstrate how Australian literature engages with the nation's unique historical, cultural, and environmental contexts. Through various narratives, authors explore complex themes such as colonialism, identity, landscape, and multiculturalism, offering profound insights into the Australian experience. Australian literature, like the nation itself, has a rich and diverse history that reflects its unique social, cultural, and political contexts. Here's an overview covering its origin, history, evolution, concepts, definitions, features, pioneering figures, key texts, contributions, and impact. 1. Origin and history. Origin. Australian literature began with the oral traditions of Indigenous Australians, who used storytelling to pass down knowledge, culture, and spiritual beliefs. With the arrival of British settlers in the late 18th century, written literature began to emerge, heavily influenced by English literary traditions. History. 18th century. Early Australian literature was predominantly written by British convicts and settlers. Journals, letters, and official documents from this period reflect the experiences of colonization. 19th century. The literature of this period focused on the challenges of life in the harsh Australian environment. Poets like Henry Lawson and Banjo Paterson became famous for their bush ballads that captured the spirit of the outback. 20th century. This century saw the emergence of a distinct Australian voice. Writers like Miles Franklin and Patrick White explored themes of identity, belonging, and the relationship between people and the land. Post-World War II literature began to reflect Australia's growing multicultural society. 21st century. Contemporary Australian literature is diverse, with a strong emphasis on Indigenous voices, multiculturalism, and global issues. 2. Evolution. Colonial period. Early literature was dominated by British influences, with themes of exploration, survival, and settlement. Federation to post-war period. Australian writers began to explore national identity, particularly through the landscape and the experiences of the working class. Post-war to modern period. The rise of modernism and post-colonialism influenced Australian literature, leading to more introspective and diverse narratives. Contemporary period. There is a focus on reconciliation with Indigenous Australians, as well as the representation of Australia's multicultural population. 3. Concepts and definitions. Australian identity. The exploration of what it means to be Australian, particularly in relation to the land and the legacy of colonialism. The bush. A central concept in Australian literature, representing both the challenges of the natural environment and the myth of the rugged Australian character. Multiculturalism. The representation of Australia's diverse population, exploring themes of migration, identity, and belonging. Postcolonialism. Analyzing the effects of colonization on both Indigenous and settler populations, often critiquing historical narratives and power dynamics. 4. Features. Connection to the land. The Australian landscape, with its unique flora, fauna, and climate, plays a significant role in shaping narratives and themes. Diverse voices. Incorporates Indigenous perspectives, migrant experiences, and the voices of marginalized communities. Exploration of identity. Whether through the lens of nationalism, gender, race, or class, Australian literature often examines the complexities of identity. Historical and social contexts. Reflects Australia's history, including its colonial past, participation in global conflicts, and social changes. 5. Pioneering figures. Henry Lawson (1867–1922), often referred to as Australia's greatest short story writer, Lawson depicted the hardships of rural life. Banjo Paterson (1864–1941), a poet and journalist known for his bush ballads, including The Man from Snowy River. Miles Franklin (1879–1954), a feminist writer best known for My Brilliant Career. The Miles Franklin Award is named in her honor. Patrick White (1912–1990), the first Australian to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. White's novels, such as Voss and The Tree of Man, are key texts in Australian literature. Christina Stead (1902–1983), known for her novel The Man Who Loved Children, Stead explored complex family dynamics and psychological themes. 6. Key texts. My Brilliant Career, by Miles Franklin, a seminal work in Australian literature, addressing themes of independence and gender roles. Voss, by Patrick White, a novel that delves into the exploration of the Australian interior, both physically and psychologically. Cloud Street, by Tim Winton, a modern classic that captures the essence of Australian life, focusing on two working-class families. The Secret River, by Kate Grenville, explores the violent encounters between British settlers and Indigenous Australians. Carpentaria, by Alexis Wright, a powerful novel that presents a sweeping view of life in a fictional town in northern Australia, blending Indigenous storytelling traditions with contemporary issues. 7. Contributions. Cultural representation. Australian literature provides insight into the country's diverse cultural heritage, including Indigenous cultures, European settlement, and immigrant experiences. National identity. Through its literature, Australia has been able to explore and define its national identity, distinct from its colonial roots. Social commentary. Many works offer critiques of societal norms, colonial history, and contemporary issues like race, gender, and environmental concerns. Global recognition. Australian literature has gained international acclaim, with writers like Patrick White, Peter Carey, and Richard Flanagan earning prestigious awards, including the Nobel Prize and the Booker Prize. 8. Impact. Influence on Australian society. Literature has played a crucial role in shaping public discourse around issues like Indigenous rights, immigration, and national identity. Educational value. Australian literature is a key part of the curriculum in schools and universities, helping students understand their country's history and culture. International recognition. Australian writers have made significant contributions to world literature, with many works being translated into multiple languages and studied worldwide. Preservation of Indigenous cultures. The inclusion of Indigenous voices in Australian literature has been vital in preserving and promoting Aboriginal culture and languages. Conclusion. Australian literature is a dynamic and evolving field that continues to reflect and shape the nation's identity. From its colonial origins to its current focus on reconciliation and multiculturalism, Australian literature provides a rich tapestry of narratives that explore the complexities of life in this unique part of the world. Its pioneering figures and key texts have left an indelible mark on global literature, contributing to a deeper understanding of Australia's past, present, and future. To structure the evolution of Australian literature according to a timeline, we'll divide it into distinct periods that reflect significant historical, social, and cultural developments in the literature. Here's how the timeline can be organized. Pre-colonial period before 1788. Indigenous oral traditions. Before European settlement, Australian literature consisted of the rich oral traditions of Indigenous Australians. Stories, songs, and rituals passed down through generations encapsulated their culture, history, and connection to the land. These narratives often involved dreamtime stories, which explained the creation of the world and the relationship between humans, animals, and the environment. Colonial period 1788-1850 OS. Early written accounts. With the arrival of the First Fleet in 1788, written literature began to emerge. Early works included journals, letters, and diaries of convicts, settlers, and explorers, documenting their experiences in the new colony. Notable examples include Watkin Tenches, a narrative of the expedition to Botany Bay, 1789, and A Complete Account of the Settlement at Port Jackson, 1793. Themes: survival, exploration, and the harsh realities of colonial life dominated the literature of this period. Victorian and Federation period, 1850s–1914. Bush ballads and nationalism. This era saw the rise of bush poetry, with poets like Henry Lawson and Banjo Paterson capturing the Australian outback spirit. Their works, such as Lawson's The Drover's Wife, and Paterson's The Man from Snowy River, reflected the rugged individualism associated with the Australian bush and the emerging national identity. Early novels. Novels like Marcus Clarke's For the Term of His Natural Life, 1874, which depicted the brutal convict system, and Rolf Boulderwood's Robbery Under Arms, 1882, focusing on bushrangers, began to shape the national narrative. Federation 1901. The literature of this time began to reflect the growing sense of Australian identity, particularly after the federation of the Australian colonies into a single nation in 1901. Interwar period 1914–1945. Modernism and psychological exploration. During the interwar years, Australian literature began to experiment with modernist themes and techniques. Writers like Christina Stead, with The Man Who Loved Children, 1940, explored complex family dynamics and psychological depth. Patrick White's early work. Patrick White, who would later become Australia's first Nobel laureate in literature, began publishing during this period. His novel, Happy Valley, 1939, reflected the influence of European modernism. War literature. The impact of World War I and later World War II was also reflected in literature, with works addressing the trauma and experiences of Australian soldiers. Post-war period 1945–1970 OS. The rise of the Australian novel. This period marked the maturation of the Australian novel. Patrick White's works, such as Voss, 1957, and Riders in the Chariot, 1961, became internationally recognized. White's exploration of the Australian landscape and the human psyche significantly impacted Australian literature. Feminist literature. Miles Franklin's My Brilliant Career, 1901, had laid the groundwork for feminist themes, but it was in the post-war period that women writers began to gain more prominence. Writers like Elizabeth Harrower and Thea Astley explored themes of gender, power, and identity. Indigenous voices begin to emerge. Although still marginalized, the post-war period saw the first stirrings of Indigenous Australian voices in literature, with writers like Ogeru Nunukul, formerly Kath Walker, publishing works that addressed the experiences and rights of Aboriginal Australians. Contemporary period 1980s present. Multiculturalism and diverse voices. The late 20th century saw a shift towards reflecting Australia's multicultural society. Writers like Tim Winton, Cloud Street, 1991, and Christos Tsiolkas, The Slap, 2008, explored diverse cultural identities and social issues. Indigenous literature. Indigenous Australian literature gained prominence, with writers like Alexis Wright Carpentaria, 2006, and Kim Scott Benang, 1999, winning major literary awards and bring Indigenous stories to the forefront. Global recognition. Australian literature began to gain significant international recognition. Peter Carey won the Booker Prize twice, for Oscar and Lucinda, 1988, and True History of the Kelly Gang, 2001. Richard Flanagan won the Booker Prize for The Narrow Road to the Deep North, 2014. Contemporary themes. Current Australian literature often addresses global issues such as climate change, migration, and reconciliation with Indigenous Australians. It also continues to explore identity, place, and the relationship between people and the land. Pioneering figures and key texts timeline. Henry Lawson 1867–1922, The Drover's Wife, 1892. Banjo Paterson 1864–1941, The Man from Snowy River, 1890. Miles Franklin 1879–1954, My Brilliant Career, 1901. Patrick White 1912–1990, Voss, 1957, Riders in the Chariot, 1961. Christina Stead 1902–1983, The Man Who Loved Children, 1940. Peter Carey 1943, Oscar and Lucinda, 1988, True History of the Kelly Gang, 2001. Tim Winton 1960, Cloud Street, 1991. Alexis Wright 1950, Carpentaria, 2006. Richard Flanagan 1961, The Narrow Road to the Deep North, 2014. Impact and contribution. National identity. Literature has been integral to Australia's understanding and development of its national identity. Global influence. Australian authors have made significant contributions to world literature, bringing unique perspectives from the Southern Hemisphere to a global audience. Cultural reflection. Australian literature mirrors the country's diverse society, reflecting its history, conflicts, and evolving identity. Indigenous representation. The increasing presence of Indigenous voices in literature has contributed to greater awareness and understanding of Australia's First Peoples. This timeline highlights the evolution of Australian literature from its origins in Indigenous oral traditions to its current status as a significant and influential body of work on the global stage. Australian literature has made a profound impact on world literature, contributing distinctive voices, themes, and perspectives that have resonated globally. Here's a detailed overview of the major writers, award-winning works, and movements that have shaped Australian literature's impact on the world stage. Impact on world literature. Australian literature has contributed significantly to the global literary landscape in the following ways. Unique themes and settings. The harsh yet beautiful Australian landscape, the bush, and the outback have provided a unique setting for storytelling. These themes explore the relationship between people and the land, isolation, survival, and the construction of identity in a post-colonial society. Global recognition of Indigenous narratives. The rise of Indigenous Australian literature has brought the struggles, histories, and cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to a global audience. This has increased awareness and understanding of the impact of colonization and the importance of cultural preservation. Exploration of universal themes. Australian writers have effectively tackled universal themes such as identity, belonging, exile, and the human condition, resonating with readers worldwide. Their works often explore the intersection of personal and national identity, particularly in the context of post-colonialism. Contribution to post-colonial literature. Australian literature is a key component of the broader post-colonial literary canon. It reflects the complexities of colonial and post-colonial identity, the reconciliation process, and the ongoing struggles of Indigenous communities. Award-winning major writers and works. Several Australian writers have gained international acclaim and won prestigious literary awards, marking the country's significant contribution to world literature. 1. Patrick White. Awards. Nobel Prize in Literature, 1973. Notable works. Voss, 1957. The Tree of Man, 1955. Riders in the Chariot, 1961. Impact. Patrick White was the first Australian to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, and his work is known for its deep psychological insight and complex portrayal of Australian society and landscape. His writing helped establish Australian literature on the world stage. 2. Peter Carey. Awards. Booker Prize for Oscar and Lucinda, 1988. Booker Prize for True History of the Kelly Gang, 2001. Notable works. Oscar and Lucinda, 1988. True History of the Kelly Gang, 2000. Bliss, 1981. Impact. Peter Carey's novels often explore historical and cultural themes through innovative narrative techniques. His work has been celebrated for its originality and depth, contributing significantly to Australian and world literature. 3. Tim Winton. Awards. Miles Franklin Award 4 times. Booker Prize shortlist for The Riders, 1995, and Dirt Music, 2002. Notable works. Cloud Street, 1991. The Riders, 1994. Dirt Music, 2001. Impact. Tim Winton's work is noted for its portrayal of the Australian environment and the lives of ordinary Australians. His novel, Cloud Street, is considered a modern Australian classic and has been adapted into various formats, including a stage play and a TV series. 4. Alexis Wright. Awards. Miles Franklin Award for Carpentaria, 2007. Notable works. Plains of Promise, 1997. Carpentaria, 2006. The Swan Book, 2013. Impact. Alexis Wright is an Indigenous Australian writer whose work often explores the impact of colonization and the resilience of Indigenous cultures. Her novel, Carpentaria, won widespread acclaim and solidified her place as a major voice in contemporary literature. 5. Richard Flanagan. Awards. Booker Prize for The Narrow Road to the Deep North, 2014. Notable works. The Sound of One Hand Clapping, 1997. Gold's Book of Fish, 2001. The Narrow Road to the Deep North, 2014. Impact. Richard Flanagan's work, especially his Booker Prize-winning novel, The Narrow Road to the Deep North, has been praised for its powerful storytelling and exploration of war, memory, and identity. Pioneering figures and movements. 1. Henry Lawson and Banjo Paterson. Movement. Bush ballads and poetry, late 19th to early 20th century. Impact. These writers are key figures in the development of Australian literature, known for their vivid depictions of the Australian bush and rural life. Their work helped shape Australian national identity and has had a lasting influence on the country's literary tradition. 2. Miles Franklin. Movement. Early feminist literature. Notable work. My Brilliant Career, 1901. Impact. Miles Franklin was a pioneering figure in Australian feminist literature. The Miles Franklin Award, established in her honor, is one of Australia's most prestigious literary prizes, awarded annually to the best novel or play depicting Australian life. 3. Judith Wright. Movement. Environmental and Indigenous rights advocacy in literature. Notable works. Collected Poems, 1994. Impact. Judith Wright was a leading Australian poet whose work addressed both environmental and social issues, particularly the rights of Indigenous Australians. Her poetry is celebrated for its lyrical beauty and strong ethical concerns. Key literary movements in Australian literature. Bush ballads, late 19th century, focused on the rural and outback life, reflecting the hardships and spirit of the Australian bush. It contributed to the development of a distinct Australian identity. Modernism. Early to mid-20th century, Australian literature embraced modernist techniques and themes, with writers like Patrick White exploring complex psychological and existential questions. Post-colonial literature. Mid to late 20th century, this movement examined the legacy of British colonization, the struggle for national identity, and the experiences of Indigenous Australians. Indigenous literature. Late 20th century to present, marked by the rise of Indigenous voices in Australian literature. This movement has brought global attention to the histories, cultures, and ongoing struggles of Australia's First Nations peoples. Conclusion. Australian literature has had a lasting impact on world literature, bringing unique perspectives from the Southern Hemisphere and contributing to the global dialogue on issues such as identity, colonization, and the environment. Through the works of award-winning authors and influential movements, Australian literature continues to resonate with readers worldwide, offering rich narratives that reflect the complexities of both the Australian experience and universal human concerns.